Hola, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. Man, every time I start talking, my mouth just completely fills up with spit. Does anyone else feel that? Every time I do my good evening, good afternoon, whatever to the digital world, I worry that I'll make it to the end of that sentence. So it probably comes across in all my episodes. Anyway, how you all doing? I hope you're keeping well. Since last episode, maybe you've been checking out parody films, seeing if you actually like them or not. I, for one, was inspired to go back and watch all the Mel Brooks films, and I had myself a good giggle. So just a standard episode today, because I don't have any new movies for me to review for you just yet. We will get there. But I do want to talk about something which it's funny. I wanted to talk about this when I started my podcast back at the end of 2019, because it seemed at that point, this thing that I'm going to talk about, which you probably already know about because it's the title of the vid and the episode and the Spotify, but whatever, I'm going to pretend like you don't know. It was flying high. Its reach had extended to at least 5 shows with sort of a close relationship with a 6th one, I should say, a 7th one about to premiere, an 8th one potentially about to jump over from streaming, culminating in this gigantic, it was this big crossover episode arc thing, which promised we hadn't yet seen the last of what was going on with this world. Here we are 3 years later, it's dead. It's basically dead. The Last Man Standing is about to start its final season on the CW. So to talk about it now, I feel it's like my last chance before it's gone forever. So we'll talk about it in a different way. We won't talk about it as a whole. We'll talk about its origins and then how this world sort of affected the main show that kicked all of this off. Because each show in this world is probably worth talking about in its own separate episode. To try and sum it all up in one, we'd be here for hours, so we won't do that precisely. But basically, if you haven't already caught on by now, we are looking at the once glorious but now graveyard world known as the Arrowverse, a connected world of DC Comics TV shows that were existing on the CW channel that all spawned from a show about Green Arrow called Arrow, which had premiered in 2012. What originally started as an idea of a spin-off for the Oliver Queen character from Smallville quickly became its own thing, a runaway success, which then very slowly started the idea of maybe we could build a world within this TV show, or at very least we can have a spin-off. And a spin-off would lead to a spin-off, would lead to a spin-off, would lead to companion shows also sharing this world. It got huge, got gigantic. And for a long time, mostly quality TV show. Storytelling, some better than others. But in most cases, shows that are of middling quality tend to be a little bit better when they all cross over and play with each other and can riff on each other. It's why the Avengers films are so popular. It's why the Dick Wolf franchise of all the Chicago shows, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago Med, that's got a solid fan base, including me, because of how interconnected those shows are and how the main characters weave in and out of storytelling. But even something like bloody NCIS, which has been on for 20 years now, recently, for the first time, did a 3-episode free show crossover on one night with its spin-offs Los Angeles and Hawaii. And apparently ratings went through the roof for that, and it was a very, very, very enjoyable crossover. So I think we as a society just enjoy seeing people who don't normally interact with each other, especially if they've got really good chemistry. So basically our focus for this episode is about the show that started it all, Arrow, starring Stephen Amell. And it's more a reflection of that show's quality, its highs, its lows, and how the Arrowverse as a concept affected that show. I think in terms of the show on its own as negative, but as the concept of building a world, a positive. So if you're unfamiliar with any of this, all right, enjoy. Basically, Arrow premiered in 2012. It was a very gritty, down-to-earth style superhero show. It was basically the CW's way of making a Batman show, but not with Batman. So instead they used Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, who had been more of a bright, snarky, funny guy in the comics and in Smallville. The Oliver Queen of this world was turned into a Bruce Wayne type character, a very serious, violent, shallow individual, not shallow, solemn, that's the one I wanted. Which makes sense for the concept of how Oliver Queen became the Green Arrow. Basically, it had a unique concept where the show picked up Oliver Queen had been this rich playboy asshole character who was always out partying and cheated on his girlfriends with their sisters and did pretty shitty stuff until his yacht went down near a deserted island, this island being Lian-Yu. So the show picks up, Oliver had been on that island for 5 years. So he's rescued, he's brought back to his best friend and his mother and his new adoptives, his new stepdad and his sister. Everyone expects him to tell all about the island, but he keeps it very close to himself. His personality has shifted ever so slightly. You can tell there's something different about him. And right away, he has a mission. He has this book of names, and he immediately sets out with a bow and arrow and a hood over his head to start hunting down and killing these people who he believes have failed his city being Starling City, would eventually become Star City. The format of the show was that over the course of the first 5 seasons, the storytelling was juxtaposed between what Oliver was doing in the present as the Hood, as the Arrow, as the eventual Green Arrow, and his time on Lian-Yu and how what he encountered over there, the people he ran into, the violence, the brutality of it all, transformed him into the Oliver Queen that we know now, that put him on the path of his vendetta with his little list of names and all of that stuff. So for a CW show, the CW always takes a lot of flack for saying that it's cheesy, corny, pretty subpar storytelling and shows. When you look at something like Better Call Saul or what's the new thing at the moment that everybody loves, The Last of Us, something like that. It's the case in some things, I will agree. I think the CW cops a bit of flack. The CW, it is on a cheaper budget. It shoots in Canada, but the CW takes more chances. The CW goes for shows that a lot of networks like the CBS or ABC don't necessarily think will work for their clientele on their networks, which is probably why NCIS will always be like the #1 rated show on CBS, because it's all the oldies, and I guess I'm one of them, that sit around going, I remember when Gibbs was on Jag. That sort of thing. The CW will take these superhero shows, especially being financed by Warner Brothers, who have the rights to these DC characters, and will do these shows. And they will commit to them as well, regardless of ratings, really. Back in the old days, it took a lot for a CW show to be cancelled. So if you got a show on there, you expected it to run for a good 5 seasons minimum. I mean, Supernatural was on there and it ran for 15 seasons. And aside from just the junk, the stuff that, it's of middling quality, you had things like Supernatural, like Smallville, like Arrow, who, aside from some of the cheesiness and the corniness and a bit of the budget lack thereof, there was some really good acting and some really good storytelling, some twists and turns. And that was the case with Arrow in those first couple of seasons. Really likable characters in Oliver Queen and his bodyguard / best friend John Diggle, and then bringing in IT tech Felicity Smoke, pulling in other superheroes like Arsenal and Black Canary, all joining Oliver's crusade, juxtaposing with his time on the island and the things going on there, especially when the stories managed to interweave. So, for example, Season 2 is widely considered Arrow's very best season, because on the island, he encountered a man called Slade Wilson. They became the best of chums. Some terrible stuff happened to Slade over there, and he eventually became the supervillain Deathstroke, and then came after Oliver back when he was back in Starling City. So Season 2 while you were seeing Oliver and Slade's relationship deteriorate and become the enemies that they are on the island, you're seeing Slade play out his vengeance game against Oliver in the present day. It was perfect storytelling with perfect beats in terms of rising tension and drama and character deaths and spins to a very exciting conclusion. All enhanced by Stephen Amell as Oliver Queen. He became this very stoic, intense character. He also was pretty nice to look at, so I'm told. And he was really good at showcasing the personalities that were different. He could play happy-go-lucky party boy Oliver being absolutely abused on that island, and then violent, crusading Green Arrow who will absolutely kill someone because they may know that he might have a secret. Stuff like that. It was really, really good stuff. Arrow's reputation then took a dip. And I am moving into my second point on this episode in that I blame what the Arrowverse was and what it did to Arrow's standing. Because in those early days, Arrow was not a supernatural, magical, ordinary type of superhero show. There were no powers. There were no mystical demons or super abilities or aliens from other planets. It was down to earth. The enemies that Oliver encountered were man-made. You could imagine those people existing in real life with the super assassins, the swordsmen, the terrorists, even Oliver himself, how he operates, how he moves, is very vigilante that you could imagine could one day exist in our world. But then season 2 comes along and someone comes up with the idea of what if we introduced Barry Allen, the Flash, as like a guest character in a two-parter episode of Arrow to hint that Barry will go on to have his own superhero fun as the Flash and get his own show. They absolutely lucked out because they cast Grant Gustin as Barry, who is instantly lovable and became that character and was wonderful and everybody loved him. And even more so, his chemistry with Stephen Amell, the Oliver-Barry friendship, was solid, was great to watch. It's better, I would argue, than the Tony-Steve relationship in The Avengers, because I will say, as much as I love those movies and I love those characters, a lot of the implication that characters like Tony and Steve and Bruce and Thor are best friends, you don't see a lot of that. You get a lot of movies that tell you they're friends, but most of the time you see them arguing and hating each other or getting upset when one has died. But Oliver and Barry in the Arrowverse, they really put the effort in to have them in multiple episodes together, to see them interacting with each other, to see that friendship form, because Oliver and Barry are as different as night as day. Oliver is dark and depressing and sees the gloominess and the worst in people, whereas Barry is happy-go-lucky and positive and sees the best in people. Barry's The Flash show is full of funny jokes and quips and exciting things are happening, and in Oliver's Arrow show, it's who's betrayed me this week, who's been horribly mangled and hurt this week. But seeing them together and play off each other, you could tell that even though they were different, they had a real strong respect for each other and they genuinely were friends. So of course it's successful. Grant Gustin runs off, starts The Flash season 1. Now the Flash is superpowered. He gets struck by lightning as well as falling into chemicals, which gives him his super speed. At the same time that a particle accelerator explodes in Central City, thereby giving a whole bunch of people in town powers, including the ability to manipulate the weather, to turn into mist, to shoot lightning from their mouth, to manipulate lights, to hypnotize people, to teleport, all of that. Most of the Flash's episodes were him encountering someone with a different ability every week and defeating them, very Smallville style. But this Flash show also existed in the Arrow world, and Arrow, I guess, couldn't operate in its own bubble. You couldn't have all the outlandish stuff going on in Central City and be like, but none of that happens outside of Central City. So Arrow, as it adapted to The Flash, and also The Flash eventually having its own crossover with Supergirl, introducing a whole bunch of characters that would go off and form their own team called the Legends of Tomorrow, Arrow stepped up what it was that he ended up facing, which meant his first real outlandish enemy was Damien Dark, Well, I guess Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul had the Lazarus Pit, which made them immortal, but that's a very small part. Damien Darhk was a full-on magician who could manipulate telekinesis, and he had his magic totem, which made him immortal, all of that stuff. Damien Darhk is in season 4, and Arrow season 4 is considered one of the worst television stuff of all time. I can't pinpoint it exactly, but you watch it and everything just feels cheap and fake, and it doesn't feel like the show that you fell in love with 2 seasons ago. To a point where, infamously, after Arrow's season 4 finale hit, people were so upset with it that the Reddit that was donated to Arrow, everybody just unanimously agreed to change it to Daredevil and just started talking about how much they liked the Daredevil show on Netflix instead. Arrow managed to pull itself out of that slump. What happened after that was Arrow's perception, reception, quality roller coasted for the last. It ran for 8 seasons, so from season 5 to 8. Season 5 was like a renaissance for the show. It brought it all back to what made Arrow good. Oliver's vendetta against Prometheus, the Adrian Chase character, was very reminiscent of the Malcolm Merlyn, Slade Wilson from the earlier stuff. Then it struggled in terms of characters leaving. We were losing Thea and Quentin, Felicity, bringing in other characters to be a part of Team Arrow, which did not have the same impact. And that was the other thing as well. Arrow, as much as it tried to bring everything back to basics, to what it was, it still believed that the superhero formula needed to be followed. The Flash had his own team helping him. He had Cisco, he had Caitlin, he had Iris. The Legends are a group of individuals with powers working together. So Arrow, of course, eventually had to have his own team, his tech support. Then he had Mr. Terrific and Wild Dog and Black Canary and Ragman. It took away from just Oliver as this solitary figure going up against bad guys on his own. But I will say this, of all the shows, Arrow ended on its own terms. Arrow managed to line up its 8th season, which ended up being its last because Stephen Amell decided to move on. And quite rightly, you cannot have the Arrow show without Oliver Queen. I'm glad they didn't even consider trying. But they lined up those last couple episodes of season 8 with this big crossover. It was called The Crisis of Infinite Earths. Now, Arrowverse had started doing this annual thing where they'd have a big crossover. It started off small, where it was just Arrow and Flash's shows crossing over together. Then when the Legends of Tomorrow, which were assorted characters from across Arrow and Flash, Ray Palmer, Leonard Snart, Sarah Lance, Martin Stein, all these people in a time-traveling escapade show joined on. They got to join in on the crossovers. Once Supergirl failed on the CBS and they brought her over to the CW, she got to join in as well. So what started as a 2-show crossover quickly evolved into a 4-show crossover. And the escalating tension as well got bigger and bigger. It started out with just Oliver and Barry each helping out each other for the week, to introducing the Hawks and the immortal Vandal Savage, to literally the Earth being invaded by a parallel Earth run by Nazis, to Oliver and Barry swapping lives entirely. But there was always building towards bigger and bigger. There was this mysterious figure called the Monitor who kept showing up and saying everybody has to be ready because the crisis of infinite Earths is coming that will destroy everything that ever was and will be. And eventually it did happen. It was a 5-part show crossover that also included Batwoman, which had just started as well. But this was the most ambitious thing that I've ever seen, and it was amazing how successful it was. It was basically the Monitor's opposite. The Anti-Monitor wanted to wipe out every world in the multiverse, replace it with antimatter, which meant that the show could allude that in the multiverse was also the Smallville world, the Constantine world, the Lucifer world, the Batman of the Michael Keaton years, the Christopher Reeves Superman years, anything on the DC Universe streaming app, so Titans, Doom Patrol, Swamp Thing. They were all out there in the world, all putting in their own little cameos and all being erased by the Anti-Monitor. Eventually, a very small team of superheroes was left to face the Anti-Monitor, but at the end of the day, it was Oliver Queen who stepped in and saved the day at the cost of his own life. He literally sacrificed himself to save the multiverse and rebuild it as anew. And then Arrow got a final little episode to sort of see how everybody reacted to Oliver being dead and what his sacrifice meant to people. And then that was it. That was the end of Arrow. satisfactory. But Arrow finishes, Crisis on Infinite Earth finishes, the DC Power Wigs that be are like, don't you worry. That was just the beginning. Superman and Lois is about to premiere. Black Lightning's officially been inducted into the world. We'll be doing crossovers still. Our next one will be Superman and Lois and Batwoman. Stay tuned. That was January 2020, before the pandemic. But here we are 3 years later. In 2021, Supergirl was announced to be finishing and Black Lightning was announced to be finishing. 2022, Legends of Tomorrow and Batwoman cancelled unceremoniously. The Flash announced to only have one final short-run season. Superman and Lois, in a desperate bid to stay alive, has started claiming that they were never a part of the Arrowverse, so hopefully they can continue on. Now, you could argue there are a lot of reasons why this happened. How do you top something like Crisis on Infinite Earths? The pandemic itself putting an impact on how these shows could operate, so they couldn't really cross over because they had to follow all the guidelines and safety procedures. That's why Chicago stopped crossing over for quite a while too. The CW itself as a channel completely changed, turned over, bought out by a new company who sees a future for the CW involving reality TV and golf. So anything on the CW was basically doomed. The shows that fought on, I commend them for it, but Legends of Tomorrow, I will always hate you for deciding to finish on a cliffhanger knowing full well you probably weren't going to get another season. I don't know what's left on the CW, to be honest. I think All American might be. I pray that Superman and Lois will continue on, but I'm not hopeful. And that's it. The Arrowverse went from being this all-time greatest crossover thing, combining all shows and being the epitome of television in 2020 to here we are in 2023, and there's literally nothing left. The Flash is about to start its final season, and honestly, I couldn't be more thrilled, because if people complain that the Arrow dipped in quality, I don't know what the hell happened to the Flash. It started off so good, but these last couple of seasons, it's nightmare inducing. There are very few shows that I ever consider not watching anymore because I just can't stand them anymore. The Flash is one of them. It's just pitiful what it's become. Legends was the only show still existing from the Arrowverse which I generally thought was consistently good, funny, entertaining, and I got a kick out of. Batwoman never really hooked me, but that whole thing about Ruby Rose going and Javicia Leslie coming in, I never really connected with any sort of Batwoman because you never knew which one you were following. Supergirl, I liked solely for Melissa Benoist as Supergirl, but it did get very overtly political towards the end of it, which is fine, just don't be so heavy-handed about it. Black Lightning I thought was interesting, but again, it didn't get to play in the Arrowverse long enough before it was also unceremoniously cancelled. It's just a lot of shows which you went from having too much. I'd say there was too much quantity and now there's nothing, which is just bamboozling. It'd be like if Avengers Endgame had hit and then 3 years later I'd be telling you now I don't know when the next MCU movie is coming because they cancelled them all the actors don't want to do it anymore. That's how just crazy. It's just how nuts that such a show, such a thing that was such a big thing of pop culture could just shrivel up and die so suddenly after getting as big as it did. But at the end of the day, whatever effect the Arrowverse had on Arrow at least can comfortably say it had a solid run of 8 seasons. It finished on its own terms. There were some bits that were really, really, really good and some bits that were not very good at all. But for the most part, it was an enjoyable new take on a DC character that inspired so many shows and started off something which I don't know will ever be matched on television again in the scale of superheroes. There's plenty of police procedurals that are constantly spinning off. Like, I cannot keep track of 911 spin-offs and FBI spin-offs and the Rookie spin-offs and all of that stuff. But in the age of spin-offs and cop shows and television versions of classic movies which never go past their first season, or taking risks on shows like La Brea and Manifest and then having to just watch and wait to see when the networks will give up on them, not if but when. The idea that the Arrowverse, at least from 2012 to 2020, was this very interconnected, solid form of storytelling for these DC characters, and that everybody connected in it were so good together. It's an exciting it's an interesting bit of history that will be interesting if they ever hit it again, but I don't think so. Anyway, there you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did like any of these Arrowverse shows, feel free to let me know what your favorite was. If you agree with me that the Arrowverse was a success at the detriment of Arrow, or if you're shocked as well at how the Arrowverse went from being the highest high to the lowest low, if you think season 4 of Arrow was actually good, if you think The Flash is still good, whatever. Even if you just want to not tell me. It's a weird thing to say. If you just want to think about that yourself, I guess that would be good too. I'll be back next week for another episode. We're getting very close to our 200th episode. I don't know what I'm going to do for that. I hope I do something special. Anyway, it's just a week closer to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So count the days till that one. But until next time, till next week, I love and appreciate you as always. It's always been a treat talking to you. You're all tremendous. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.